Hi guys! So today I thought I'd go crazy and have a little image of myself in the corner. I figure maybe seeing somebody talk to you, an actual, teacher human might make it more enjoyable. I also have my trusty helper here, which is my little Beau, who is, very into English. Okay, so we've done quite a lot of Macbeth, I think, and you're probably a bit fed up of it. Well, I can't believe that's true because obviously it is the most wonderful thing, but I thought we'd move on to Dickens and have a week of revisiting Christmas Carol, and then maybe we can do Blood Brothers, maybe some poems, and see how we tick along. Okay, so in terms of Christmas Carol, you haven't studied it for a little while, so we're just going to start this session with some revision, retrieval, and I'm going to direct you to a couple of resources I want you to look at in preparation for the next lesson. So what we have here is something very familiar to you, which is a little retrieval question grid. So I've just generated 12 questions. It's quite a lot, I know, which are a bit random, really, just to get you thinking again about A Christmas Carol and to get you not just remembering things that happen in the novel, but also some of the symbolism, some of the themes, some of the big ideas. So not much to listen to from me. All I'd like to do is to pause the video and answer the questions. You don't need to draw out the grid, obviously. You can just answer them in a list, and then in a few moments, 10 minutes or so, when you've answered as many as you can, unpause the video and we'll talk through the answers. No cheating. 10 minutes, do the questions yourself, write the answers, and then we'll go through them together. Okie dokie. So I trust that everybody paused the video and did the questions properly. Now, these questions aren't definite. Those, your answers might be ever so slightly different, but these are the answers I have generated prior to the lesson. So the first question, obviously, was about what life lesson we can take from Scrooge. And obviously this is the biggest question, really, of all, isn't it? Because in Scrooge, we see a character who changes, a character who shows us a moral or a life lesson. So what I've suggested here, the easiest way to summarise that lesson, is that Dickens is the worst of humanity. He is greedy and cruel and unable to, or unwilling to see other people suffering. But by the end of the novel, he finds his compassion. He realises that greed is actually hugely destructive, and he changes for the better. So I would say Dickens's message there is, if even he can change, anyone can. So the real life readers of the Victorian period who were greedy, maybe not to the same extent as Scrooge, because he's a bit of an extreme hyperbolic version, but who were greedy and unkind, it's a message to them that there's hope, that they can too change their ways. Okay, question 2 then was a more straightforward plot retrieval question. What's the first place Dickens takes, the ghost that takes Scrooge to? He goes to his school, doesn't he? And if you remember, we see a really sad Scrooge. We see a young child left behind at Christmas time, reading and using his imagination to try and escape his loneliness. So Dickens doesn't want to have a completely unlikable narrator, main character, sorry. The heartless, horrible Scrooge we've met on Stave 1 isn't very engaging for us as a reader to go on a journey with. The sad child lonely at school who becomes this horrible adult, much more engaging, and we can empathise. Question 3 then. Again, it's kind of a plot one. How does Scrooge change across the novel? Fairly straightforward. We've obviously talked about it a little bit. At the beginning, he's cold, he's callous, he's greedy, he cares for no one. He sees family as a burden and an expense rather than something that brings value to life. By the end, he realises that all human life has value. Rich or poor, human life should be sacred. Question 4 up in the corner then, a bit about the Cratchits. The good old Cratchits, too good to be true in many ways, aren't they? But they offer us a model of a face of poverty, if you like. Dickens's world, and as you'll probably remember from your lessons, Dickens spent a lot of time walking the streets of London. He went to some of the most horrific, horrifying, rundown places in the whole of London where crime was rife and people were totally stripped of their humanity. And he saw the impacts and effects of poverty. But in this novel, he does capture that in stage 4, that kind of very bleak version of poverty. But he also wants to capture the other side of poverty, good, honest, hard-working people struggling to survive. Not people who just are lazy and can't be bothered, as perhaps was some of the views of the time, but people who deserve better. Now, of course, with the Cratchits, their children are also really important because they represent lost childhood. Tiny Tim is the most obvious example of that, isn't he? He is going to die unless something changes and society changes, because he is physically crippled. But if we think of Peter and Martha, both of them are still fundamentally children, but they're both working to support the family. And that was the case for all working class poverty-stricken children, or a lot of working class poverty-stricken children at the time. They couldn't complete their education, they couldn't keep their childhood. They had to grow up and work at a very young age. Okay, the next question then was about the symbolic function of light in the play. I think this is really similar to Macbeth, really. Light symbolises goodness, and it does in this novel as well. It symbolises the hope of goodness, that there is something pure, something better within Scrooge. Obviously, the ghost of Christmas past has a jet of light streaming from its head. The most obvious representation of that idea, that through revisiting his memories, through understanding who he is better, there is hope that Scrooge can become a better person. There's several incidents of light within the novel, and often they represent hope. Hope that Scrooge can be a better man. Okay, the next question then is a context one. What do you know about the Poor Laws? Understanding all literature helps if we understand a little bit about the world in which the text was constructed. A Christmas Carol particularly so, because it's a novel with a social function, a story with a moral. So we need to understand what the world was like to really get what Dickens was trying to argue. Key things about the Poor Laws then: they were responsible in a sense for the workhouses. The Poor Laws were the rules which determined that there would be no support or help for the poorest people, that if people couldn't afford to live, they had no option but to enter the workhouse. Workhouses, cruel, terrible places. Google them, you'll find a wealth of information, video clips about the nature of life in the workhouse. Deliberately, unnecessarily cruel. Families separated, terrible hours of labour, hardly any food. The Victorians didn't want the poor to sponge off society in a sense, so they were deliberately made to be harsh in order to try and discourage people from entering. Dickens hugely opposed to this, obviously. He felt that what the poor needed was equality and fairness and opportunities, not punishment. Okay, next question then. Why is the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come the only ghost without a source of light? Again, it links back to this question. It's about the symbolism of the novel. And as we already spoke about, light symbolises hope and goodness. So at moments in time where there is no hope for Scrooge, the novel gets darker. And when Dickens, and we as a reader, look into Scrooge's future, what we see is hopelessness. Unless he changes, his future is hopeless, because he's chosen greed over family and love and money. So that chapter is the darkest, but it's also incredibly powerful. A life without love is a future without hope, and we've got these kind of strong moral messages. Next question then is about the weather. The weather's got an important literary device in this novel. At the beginning, it's cold and in a horrible way. At the end, it's still cold. Obviously, it's December, but in a jolly way. The kind of day where you just want to get out there and run around because it's crisp and cold rather than bleak and cold. And of course, the fog is really important. In stave 1, it's foggy. In stave 5, it's clear. Scrooge can see what truly matters. Fog often symbolises this idea that we are blinded, and Scrooge, of course, is blinded. The next question is about ignorance and want and what they represent. Ignorance and want, those little deformed animal-like children that appear from beneath the cape of the Ghost of Christmas Christmas present. They symbolise the worst qualities of humanity. Ignorance to the suffering of others, greed over kindness. We see two children totally deformed, not because of their own fault, but because of the failings and shortcomings of society. A society which allows childhood to be stolen and which allows children to suffer such terrible poverty. And there's a real warning here for people from Charles Dickens. If you allow children to be treated so terribly in their youth, there is no hope for them as adults. They are going to become part of the problem potentially in adulthood. The next question then was about the difference between stave 1 and stave 5. Dickens creates this nice cyclical structure, and in stave 5 he echoes back to some ideas from stave 1. You probably came up with loads of examples. There's a couple I came up with here. The charity collectors refuse money. In stave 5, Scrooge gives them money. He's horrible to the carol singer who's a child. He's kind to the boy. Obviously orders Bob to get more coal. So you may have come up with others. What about Jacob Marley? What does Marley's ghost mean when he says mankind was my business? This is the idea that people are responsible for each other. And that's what Scrooge doesn't realise. Scrooge perceives himself as only responsible for his own self and his own wealth and his own well-being. But what Marley learns through his time as a ghost is that actually turning your back on the suffering of others does no good for anybody. And then lastly, the last question is a plot question. Stave 4, Scrooge is devastated that this unknown man, we've guessed that it's Scrooge, but Scrooge a bit slow on the uptake. This unknown man has died and nobody cares. Everybody's just trying to benefit off his death financially. He says, please take me somewhere who has an emotion about this man's death. What he doesn't see, though, is sadness. The emotion he wants to see is sadness, but obviously the ghost takes him to see people who are happy. They're not bad people being happy because someone's died, but because they've been saved. They found salvation from ruin because his cruelty has been taken from them. Okay, guys, so as I say, I could have created 12 completely different questions. I just picked 12 that I thought represented plot, character, big ideas. If you struggled with those questions, there's 2 things you can do. The first one is to go onto Google and Google A Christmas Carol full text. Because this novel is quite old, it's out of a copyright and it's online completely for free. So you can go on and you can reread the book. If you remember quite a lot of the story, but you didn't remember some of the big ideas, can I direct your attention to the knowledge booklet? This I have put on Show My Homework, and you've had it since the beginning of Year 10. This little creation I attempted to go through for every single text you've studied in Year 10. What is the most important things you need to know? A summary of key information, key lines from the text that are really important. So if, again, you think you remember the story but you don't remember some of the big ideas, find the knowledge booklet and read through that as a good starting point. Okay, so last activity I'm going to set you for today, before we do some more focus work tomorrow, is this little diagram. So 9 words. All I'd like to try to do is to write a sentence about A Christmas Carol that includes each word, okay? You don't necessarily have to do them all. You could maybe pick half if you prefer. So, for example, fog. I could pick the word fog and I could write a sentence that says, Dickens uses fog to symbolise the way Scrooge is blinded by greed at the beginning, but comes to see what truly matters in life at the end. So just a sentence that uses the word in a sentence. As always, if you get stuck, email your English teacher to ask them for help. If you do the sentences, email them to your English teachers to ask them to check them, okay? So, as I say, this session is all about getting you back into a Christmas Carol mode of thinking. You need to be proactive about either rereading the story or looking at the knowledge booklet if you feel you can't remember very much at all. Have a go at doing this little task, and then tomorrow we'll do something more focused around how do we take all that knowledge about A Christmas Carol and apply it to your to some exam style tasks and do some sort of practice sentence and paragraph level writing. I hope you're all keeping well, and I may make another appearance again in the future, but for now, from Bo and I, Bo is very sleepy, from Bo and I, we'd like to say goodbye and well done.